All right, welcome everybody. My name is Adam Walter. I am the marketing director for Cheesemans Ecology Safaris. I want to welcome everybody to our talk tonight. Right off the top, I want to introduce our main presenter, Ted Cheeseman, whale biologist, co-owner of Cheesemans Ecology Safaris, and the expedition leader for our trip. We also have Cheeseman's CEO and other owner, Gina Barton. She will be helping with our Q&A for some trip specifics. And Stephanie Ellis is with us. She's from Wildcare Cape Cod. She's the executive director, and she's going to chime in immediately after Ted's talk to kind of go over trip specifics and have some conversation with everybody on just some of the things that are going to happen during the trip and why she thinks you should go. As we go along, for Q&A purposes, if you could drop questions throughout the talk into the chat. I'll be fielding those, and then any ones that are pertinent to a specific time in Ted's talk, I'm going to pause Ted, and then I'll engage with him for that specific question. Otherwise, we'll hold most questions for the very end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ted. This is Ted Cheeseman. Take it away, Ted.
Hello, hello. Lovely. Let's see if I can share a screen here. Yeah. Delighted to have you all here. Adam, can you still get people in the waiting room while I'm doing this? I hope so. Good.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about whales. I'm going to talk about this voyage. And there'll be a bit of science in here. I'm kind of restraining myself from talking all about the science so as to give you more about the voyage that we have intended for the coming season. So I thought I'd really kind of start with a little bit of let's see, why is this not? There we go. Little bit of fun from a few years ago of the current experience of whales in Antarctica. This was filmed with an iPhone, I think. So this is Adam, I don't know if you can remove that. Someone is drawn on the screen. That's very odd. Yeah, this is about the modern experience of whales in Antarctica as we get to play there. And I think the amazing thing about this is, effectively, so this is another moment in that same whale mugging. It's just such an incredible experience, and especially to me in the context of having guided in Antarctica for almost 30 years now. So a little bit of my background: I'm raised as a biologist, but most of my career has been guiding, particularly in Antarctica, but all over the world. And in the course of my time in Antarctica, what I've really seen is this recovery of modern whale populations from a place where we just didn't see them much at all, right? So this, I love this because the person in the middle there is Kate Cummings. She's a whale. She's a captain and guide here in Monterey Bay. And so to have that kind of reaction from someone who spends all day, every day among whales in one of the best whale watching places in the world, pretty special to me. But the history of our experience in Antarctica as humans is certainly not that. The entry of humans into Antarctica was one of exploitation first. We call the 1800s and 1900s, as far as the polar realms go, the age of exploration. But really, the forefront was the age of exploitation, coming and seeing these resources and just taking them, rather than what we have the pleasure and privilege and perspective to do now, which is kind of this enjoyment and relishing the incredibleness of it. So, Antarctica.
Ted, pause for 1 second.
Yeah.
Let me allow some more people to come in and get the hosting back.
Cool, great. So in Antarctica, right, there were some 2 million whales in the Southern Ocean prior to humans showing up. They were effectively all removed. There were just the scantest few left by the time kind of about 60 years ago, when the majority of whaling stopped. There was a trailing edge of whaling that continued on into the mid 80s. But mostly whaling stopped in the sort of 60s and 70s. And these fleets, I mean, if you can imagine, multiple fleets like this, catcher vessels, factory vessels like this, we literally came in and mined the whales. We just went in and removed them. And most of those whales were made into industrial products, very low value products at the end of the day, literally margarine, fertilizer, dog food, and so on. So we're not talking about super high value products, things that fortunately were replaced by other sources. And ironically, oil was one of the big sources of them. So, I got to throw this in because there is sort of a modern lesson here. We had, incredible abundance of resources and relatively thinner appetites. And now we have these smaller resources and much larger appetites. But and this will be the only graph I show you tonight. But if we look at the modern history of humans in Antarctica, you have the left side of this graph, the history of some close to 30,000 humpback whales in the South Atlantic, until humans showed up, and then we just removed them all. Then somewhere about 50 years ago, that population started to recover, and now we're at that right corner of, my mouse doesn't show up on the screen here, but that right corner of this graph where the humpback populations in particular are recovering quite well. And so that's kind of the space that we get to step into is, instead of looking at these whales as here 20 or 30 tons of blubber and product, looking at them as living, beautiful creatures, where we're actually watching evolution and change of their behavior as their populations recover. If you think of it like, what would happen if you removed every farmer in the Midwest of the United States, and then people started coming back into it and saying, wow, look at this is some fertile land, and figuring out how to farm it once again. That's essentially what's happening in Antarctica, where humpback whales are coming back into these waters, and other species of whales as well, coming back into these waters and rediscovering what it is like to live and feed and go through all their feeding season behaviors. So to give you a bit of a landscape here, we start in Ushuaia, which is up where the text is at the top of the screen there, middle top. We cross the Drake Passage. This is generally considered a fearsome body of water, but I kind of personally beg to differ. It is fantastic seabirding, fantastic opportunity to see pelagic whales, blue whales, fin whales, humpback certainly as well, sperm whale. So quite a few different species to be found there. And the albatross, the petrels, the seabirds that once we get down into Antarctica, oops, what just happened? Once we get down into Antarctica, sorry, somehow this stopped navigating. Oh, there we go. We will leave that pelagic environment behind. We'll get down into the South Shetland Islands. Sometimes that Drake Passage crossing is rough. Sometimes it's very challenging. More often than not, it's a little bumpy, but it's pretty reasonable. Those who are prone to seasickness take some seasickness pills. Those who are not, enjoy the time up on the bridge. I have never yet had someone who got home from Antarctica and said, I wish I hadn't gone because I got so seasick or anything like that. I personally have spent a lot of my life seasick, but I enjoy being there more than I dislike being seasick, and I've unfortunately now gotten over it. But once we get into Antarctic waters, which is typically, it's kind of 2 days crossing, we will get into the South Shetland Islands. Those are the islands along the north. We'll make a landing or two there, head across the Bransfield Strait and into the Gerlach Straits and the Antarctic Peninsula area, which you see mapped out here. And where this is the track that we followed in 2019, slightly different itinerary, but we'll be exploring in and around the bays of the Gerlach Straits. And this is, if you can imagine Yosemite Valley, but draped in glaciers as it was 10,000 years ago in the last glacial maximum, that's about what we're looking at here, but hundreds of miles of it. And it's just, and then whales swimming around the base of all these incredible landscapes. That's really what we're looking at. And so here, humpback whale along the Gerlach Straits, or just zodiac cruising. I'm not advancing when I tell it to. What I love about this environment is that we humans become very small, right? We won't be the only people in Antarctica, but it will often feel like that. And operationally, that's how we work. We have a small vessel. I'm personally absolutely tied to that operation. It's a maximum of 100 people aboard, so we can have everyone out at once. We all the vessels that operate tours and expeditions in Antarctica operate under environmental guidelines where it is a maximum of 100 people ashore at a time. So if you have more than that, you can't have everybody out at the same time. So for us, that's a super critical barrier. We do not have more people than that. So we're all out in the field. And, you know, our ship is nice, our ship is comfortable, but our ship is not the destination. Really, the goal there is to be out and about in the environment. Anyone can kick back in the lounge of the ship, which has beautiful views. That's great, but we will be, as much as the weather and light and circumstances allow us, out in the field. And that is a really diverse experience. There's just the beauty of the place, but then, and a particular focus for us is all of the wildlife. And this is a very whale-focused trip for sure, going at the height of, or actually, to be perfectly honest, it's the beginning of the height of the whale season. You get maybe 5 or 10% more whales as you get later into, say, March and so on, but the days start getting shorter and shorter. So I personally feel that for the goals of this trip, we've picked the perfect time, this kind of late February, where there's still penguins around. You still have birds on colonies. Will still get a lot of this, but the whales, and the days are still quite long, and the whales are at great abundance. Penguins in Antarctica, we can't not see them. Gentoo penguins will be the species that we'll see the most of. Gentoos are increasingly abundant because of climate change, which you probably wouldn't really notice on a one-off trip to Antarctica. But with the context of history, we'll share a lot of information about what we're seeing and what changed as we've experienced over the time there. They are moving south about 1 mile per year. So where we saw penguin colonies 5 years ago, the newest Gentoo penguin colonies are about 5 miles further south. By contrast, Adelie penguins on the West Antarctic Peninsula, they are declining dramatically, and their numbers, they don't seem to be setting up new colonies on the West Antarctic Peninsula. We will see some, but not in great abundance. They are doing quite well in the Weddell Sea. I suspect we won't get over to the Weddell Sea, but itineraries them in that. Honestly, it's a really, really fun thing about voyaging in Antarctica is we're not following an absolutely set itinerary, where we have an itinerary plan, but weather and circumstances can totally change. So we're just kind of throw the itinerary out and change it all up. And make something new that works. But these creatures are the prey of the fearsome leopard seal, which are actually pretty magnificent creatures. I mean, one of the largest seals around in terms of an active large animal predator. These guys are pretty intense, though they'll get curious and playful sometimes around Zodiac. So this was taken with a 100mm lens right at the edge of my Zodiac. And Weddell seals, crab eater seals on the ice. And the ice itself here is it's an element, a photographic element and a structural element that to me is just jaw-dropping. I could spend an entire Zodiac cruise entirely just exploring icebergs, which we'll see in various stages of decomposition, bergs that have fallen off of large glaciers and strand into the shallows and sit there kind of decomposing. But I could spend a whole Zodiac cruise on that, but I will tend to focus on the wildlife. So oftentimes we'll be landing, oftentimes we'll be ashore at a penguin colony, and also have boats out at in the waters around, so you can choose be on land or be at sea. On land, it's largely penguin colonies. Sometimes there'll be seals, elephant seals, or other seals there on land, or a hike to be done. There isn't a lot of room to hike in Antarctica because of the glaciated landscape, and we're not going to be doing any mountaineering personally. I think that's a whole different endeavor. But there are some places where you can get up about and get some pretty fantastic views from land, set up a tripod, do some fantastic landscape photography. Definitely one of my favorite things about this time period is that, like, if you go in around about, kind of late December, early January and so on, that when you have near 24 hours of daylight, we will mostly be north of the Antarctic Circle. So it's been very, very long days, but at this time, late February, sunrise, sunset are in more reasonable hours. So we'll get some beautiful evening light, stunning landscapes and seascapes. We'll probably get into some zones of sea ice and evening light, just gorgeous scenes around. So again, it's kind of this environment in which we feel extremely small, and it does not seem very rich until cruising along you find the whales. And I guess this is the heart of it for me, is what brings me here and what brings me back year after year is, well, multiple things. One, just the environment that we're in, the people to share this with, but also the whales. And I'm in the midst of getting to the end of a PhD on humpback whales. And this is an element of science that I have a really fun time bringing aboard. Every single humpback, probably most here on this call know, every single humpback has an individually identifiable fluke. When they dive, they will typically lift their tails, and that tail has shape and pattern that's individually recognizable. So these whales are coming down to coming down to Antarctica. Here's a map of migratory patterns of all the humpback whales we know in Antarctica. This is about 5,000 individuals. So we will be largely in the bottom right corner of that screen there. We are traveling along in the best feeding areas of Antarctic humpback whales. And those whales in the Antarctic summer are coming into these waters, staying summer, late summer, into the fall, sometimes even into the winter, and then migrating up to warmer waters, mostly to the west coast of South America and southern Central America. Some of them migrate west, northwest to Oceania, Tonga, French Polynesia, Cook Islands, Samoa, American Samoa and such. And we even have found from the Antarctic Peninsula one whale that migrated that one line going all the way across to Australia, and very, very few of them will migrate up to the East Coast to Brazil. But when we tell this by photographing the tails and then taking those photographs, as part of my thesis work, we built automated image recognition to compare any individual to all the other whales that we know in the world. So that globally is about, it's getting close to 70,000 humpback whales. And we'll compare, well, this is something that we'll have access to aboard, being able to photograph the whales and see where they've come from. So seeing a bit of history. They do migrate to the tropics every year to calve, but probably also, and probably the main driver of their calving is, you see that yellow on the tails. That's actually a diatom film that grows on their skin while they're in this extremely cold water. They get barnacles, parasites, diatoms, all kinds of stuff growing on them, much like a ship does if like ships of old, before they had anti-fouling paint, all kinds of stuff would grow on the hull of the ship and it has to be scraped clean. Well, essentially, when the humpback whales migrate up to warmer waters, they're able to shed their skin, regrow their skin, shed all this growth. But when they're up there in those warmer waters, they are not able to feed. There's no food there, so they're basically packing on blubber in tropical waters, eating krill, and then carrying those resources and nutrients up into warmer waters where they calve, where they mate. This element, though, and for me the most magical part of it, is that in these waters, one, we often have very, very still and calm conditions. This kind of environment where you have ice in the water around us. I believe this is in Cooverville Island, where it's kind of right at the edge of the Gerlach Straits. Lots of icebergs around, and the bergs basically absorb energy, any swell energy that you might have. So yes, certainly we get windy days, we get stormy days, but the normal weather here is generally very calm waters, glassy waters, where as these whales have come to learn that we are no longer a threat to them, they've gotten to be, sometimes they will avoid us, and that is something we're very respectful of, definitely following strong, responsible whale watching guidelines. But as often as avoiding us, they're either completely ambivalent, just going about what they do, or even curious, as is the case with these minke whales, that over the last about 10 years, 12 years, actually the first experience I had of this was in 2004. And these photos are actually of that year, where minke whales suddenly just, this one whale just suddenly started coming up to our boats. And we were all blown away, because our typical experiences of a minke, which is this gorgeous, beautiful whale with these chevrons that you very rarely get to see, they'll usually, you just see a little blow and off it goes. They're not a huge whale, maybe 22, 25 feet long. So yeah, not small exactly, but compared to a humpback whale, compared to a fin whale or a blue whale, pretty darn small. And curiously coming and poking around our boats. And we've seen this a little bit more and more. It's not quite to the Scammons Lagoon, San Ignacio Lagoon, gray whale calving, where they push their calves up to the boats. But the minke whales spy hopping up next to the boat, and even killer whales, it's not terribly unusual to have a large pod of this, or what we call ecotype B, little B killer whales, where there'll be a pod and several animals will come over and check out the ship and be curious around us. So that one of my favorite things in operating here is to be relaxed and to take our time, to have enough time in the field that we aren't rushing from animal to animal. We're not sort of trying to pressure the situation, but I mean, honestly, it's letting the animals come to us, which in an environment where historically they have not been hunted. There was this little blip in time where unfortunately we did largely remove their populations, but that is sliding into the past. And along the Antarctic Peninsula, we're seeing whale populations get back to what we feel is probably pre-whaling natural. the open ocean, the pelagic environment, it's still pretty far from that. That's a story I love to share as to what we are understanding about the change in krill dynamics and how the animals actually fertilize their environment, much like a farmer or a gardener fertilizing a field with nutrients. As it happens with the large whales, they maintain nutrients in the upper water column where it's more available to phytoplankton, which grows more krill, which then allows more whales to live. We see this basically hopefully recovering. It's a major question of today is what will happen going forward as we are starting to fish krill in the Antarctic environment, even while the whale populations that depend on the krill have not fully recovered. But this kind of scene, it's just genuinely fantastic. So honestly, this is something I would genuinely love to share with all of you. There's so much more to talk about in terms of the science, in terms of the natural history, in terms of getting to know the landscape. But let's see, I've talked for about half an hour. I'd love to kind of just wrap it up and with a couple more photos of my favorite things in Antarctica. And at the end of the day, it is the people that bring me back as much as the wildlife. The expedition cruise environment, it's so fun. It's really, really fun to be able to take a group into this space that is, all these pictures I've shown you are the lovely, the shining days, but at the end of the day, the Antarctic winter is something deeply inhospitable. We tiptoe into there in the height of summer when, with all of our kit and all of our Gore-Tex and all of our gear, we're able to smile and enjoy. And right there in the middle of the photo is a kid from Fairbanks who, his parents were always like bugging him to make sure that he had some more layers with him. But in this case, he's just hanging out in a sweatshirt and a Gentoo penguin has walked up to him. This kind of friendly environment, it's not the norm of Antarctica. So being able to go in here and sort of really enjoy it and set ourselves up for this kind of whale experience is an absolute treat. And well, I'll be quiet while the whale does his thing, her thing. And with that, I'll end my talk because that's really about as good as it gets. Yeah, it's a wonderful experience to share. So be delighted to take any questions.
While people are thinking about some questions they have, Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you so you can add some stuff that you wanted to say regarding the trip.
Sure. So thank you, Ted. That was awesome. And my name is Stephanie. I'm the executive director of WildCare. WildCare is a nonprofit wildlife hospital. We're located on Cape Cod, another beautiful place. It's not like Antarctica, although sometimes in the winter it feels like it. But we take care of sick, injured, and orphan animals. And Gina, who is the CEO of the Cheesemans, she has been a dear friend of mine for several years. And she actually approached me last year and said, would you be interested in taking a Cheeseman, a group of people on a Cheesemans trip to the Antarctic Peninsula as a fundraiser for WildCare? So this would support the work that we do taking care of wildlife. And I was thrilled. I was also thrilled because I personally have known the Cheesemans for many years. I lived in California for a period of over 10 years. And I had the great fortune of taking some day trips with Doug and Gail and Ted in Monterey Bay, and very special group of people, a family that's dedicated their lives to making sure you have an incredible wildlife experience. And so I'm choosing to take people on a Cheeseman's trip because I know that you are going to have the time of your life. It's a conservation-minded group. They give back to the animals and the environment, but also they're known for spending more time in the field, like Ted said. So the boat is lovely and you're going to love it, but being out with the penguins and being on shore is where you're going to spend most of your time. And so to me, that's so exciting. Also, if you look at other groups who lead this trip, this is a long trip. You're really getting your money's worth. It's an 18-day expedition, and with incredible people. And also, after hearing Ted just now, would you ever want to go on a whale-themed trip without Ted? I don't think so. So I'm just thrilled. I hope that you will join us. It supports wildcare, and I can't wait to go. And for those of you who know me, you'll get to spend 18 days with me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Anyway, thank you so much. And also we have Gina, who's going to answer specific questions that people may have about the trip.
Ted, we'll start with one for you. Bonnie asked if there's been any fluke matching of the humpbacks who tend to mug the zodiacs.
Hey, Bonnie. We have not noticed any consistency of like this is a mugging individual, but quite frankly, that could be the case and just not really conveyed. There's probably 10,000 humpback whales that pass through the Antarctic Peninsula in the summertime, and so a pretty small percentage of them are being photographed every year. It doesn't seem to be so. In the rest of the world, in places that whale populations, humpback populations have recovered earlier, there is this really strong site fidelity. Like, say, if you go to Juneau, you are very likely to see a couple of whales flame, and oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the names. There's a few whales that are like always right there. We have not seen that in Antarctica, and I suspect that that will come to be more and more the case, where you have individuals that you know, kind of frequent certain spots and sort of friendly individuals. But to my knowledge, no. We do know which whales these are, but they haven't shown up in sort of the same place and done the same thing. So.
This might be one for either you, Ted, or Gina. What are some, Gretchen wants to know, what are some of the safety precautions for the trip?
Safety, I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, no, so I've been super involved with a group called the IATO, the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. And it's a pretty neat group. I got involved with it because it is it's basically a voluntary and self-regulating Antarctic tourism group. And that voluntary tends to be easy to fall out of, but basically the rules, safety and environmental, that IATO members have agreed to are in effect mandatory. And we operate, it's kind of a safety, it's not kind of, it is very much a safety first kind of thing, because we are so far out into an independent space, right? We have to be self-reliant. If there is a major injury aboard, it is a major problem. We have to try to get the person out, or in some ways accommodate it, which usually would mean diverting the ship for days, if not the entire itinerary. So fortunately for us, in our first Antarctic trip was 1994, so almost 30 years, We have never had to do a major itinerary diversion. We've changed itineraries for like 2 days at a time, but and only that twice. So safeties wise, lots of hands on deck, very, very experienced expedition staff. A lot of our staff are coming down from Alaska, super, super hardy folks. So the most dangerous part of the trip are twofold. One, stairs aboard the ship when the ship is moving. You'll hear me say again and again and again, one hand for the ship. That's, and the ship is built around safety aspects. So you always have, particularly on stairs, you always have a railing available. But also the Zodiac operations, getting from the ship to the Zodiac, in the Zodiac, and ashore, and that is largely training and safety resources available for us. So I see someone ask what medical support is on the ship. We have a ship's doctor. It is limited, right? We do not have. We have we have a defib machine and so on and so forth, but we do not have an intensive care facility. So if it's like your primary concern is what happens if I get sick on this ship, am I going to be able to be airlifted out immediately? If that is your primary concern, this is not the voyage for you, right? We are in a challenging environment, but we operate with a strong safety protocol. I'm not sure if I'm being specific enough, but the biggest safety tools that are available to us are training and communication, and kind of basically, we're not going ice climbing, we're not going ice scuba diving, we're staying within the bounds of ship operations that are pretty solid, and we're not going to tip our boats and so on.
Stephanie, go ahead. You wanted to say something.
Oh, yes. I wanted to mention that the Antarctic Peninsula trip that Wildcare is going on is February 20th through March 9th of 2023. I failed to mention that in all my excitement.
Ted, Cindy wants to know how many different species of whale are typically seen besides the 3 that you spoke of.
So by the numbers, humpback whales and secondarily minke whales are probably what we see the most of. Not probably, very much so. Killer whales, there are 3 ecotypes, 3, 4, depending on how you slice it, is subject to some debate. 3 different ecotypes of killer whales that are possible to see, mainly type B and type A, which are more seal eaters, and larger sort of whale and elephant seal eaters, respectively. There is a possibility of seeing Arnold's beaked whales particularly around Nico Harbor in the central Gerlach Straits. That's that we've seen a few times there. We actually had a voyage where we were towing hydrophones, and we were able to get the first known recording of those guys a few years just before COVID broke. That was pretty special. In the pelagic environment, there's a lot more possibilities. There are there's around Cape Horn, we get sei whales, we get a number of species of dolphins. There's also the possibility of blue and fin whales in the Bransfield Strait and in the Drake Passage, sperm whale in the Drake Passage. But yeah, humpbacks, minkies, and killer whales are the main animals we see up close in terms of that.
Let's see. JP wants to know, Joseph, wants to know if there's a significant difference between the March trip and other parts of the year, like October.
Yeah. So in October, November, we are going to South Georgia and the Antarctic Peninsula. This trip is strictly the Antarctic Peninsula. They're radically different trips. South Georgia involves a fair bit more sea time, but then you have the incredible wildlife of South Georgia. I would only do a South Georgia trip that is a bit longer because of the sea time and because of having enough time to really do South Georgia justice. People say, well, which one should I go on? I'm like, both. South Georgia has some of the most amazing wildlife on the planet. It's more land focused. The whale populations around South Georgia are, I literally did not see a large cetacean around South Georgia from 1994 through 2010. 2011, we started seeing some large whales, and their populations are now recovering and recovering strong. But it's nothing like the peninsula in terms of density, and also the sea conditions around South Georgia tend to make you more land focused, because that ocean, once you're outside of the fjords of South Georgia, it's very rarely friendly to small boat operations. So a South Georgia trip is a longer endeavor, but and those who are interested, definitely encourage you to look at our October voyage. To me, that's the peak season, late October, early November for South Georgia, another peak in January. But the peninsula, as far as I'm concerned, my favorite part about it is the whales in this landscape. And so that's very much what we focus on.
Will there be photography, not necessarily instruction, but photography support on the trip?
Yeah. That's so, and I did not mention that. One thing that I'm very strongly, I have a very strong conviction about taking a super high quality and large expedition staff. We are required to have one, by these IATO guidelines for safety, for environmental responsibility, to have one guide per maximum 20 travelers. We kind of radically skew that guide to guest ratio by having 15 expedition staff for our group of 100. So within that, we have professional photographers who totally are, delighted to be hands-on with you one-on-one, and as well in the field, just, support for, you got that new mirrorless camera that you meant to get out of the box and learn how to use, but you instead brought it basically straight out of the box on the ship. Great, cool, we'll help you with that. There's the whole range from my friend and fellow guide Scott Davis, who's when he's not guiding, he's on a photo assignment for name a prestigious photo assignment, National Geographic, what have you, kind of folks, to folks that are just really enthusiastic guides who know a lot about photography and are just happy to be out there in the field. We'll sometimes have a photo-oriented Zodiac versus a sort of more science-oriented Zodiac, and these kinds of things. We don't tend to segregate a lot, because I tend to, it's really like, we can mix and match there in the fields and group like-minded interests together, but it's really, I think it's, we don't have a lot of subgroups. Those who are into photography, we will do a lot aboard with that. There's also time in the field. And I think for me, as far as the photography goes, that is the most important thing, is just having the time in the field. If you go on a ship with more than 100 passengers aboard, it's like, okay, group A, now come back to the ship. Okay, group B, oh wait, but the light's really great. Nope, sorry, you have to come back to the ship. So, for me, that time in the field is just the absolute hallmark of the way to have a great voyage and a great experience there, so that you're not rushed. You can take your time and compose, and a lot more happens in the time that you have available.
This might be Gina or Ted. What gear do folks need to bring, and what is supplied on the ship?
Want to take that, Gina? Gina's on mute. So I will.
Yeah, I'm kind of answering that too. Boots are provided, so rubber boots are available on board. We ask for your sizes in advance, but you have a fitting time for that, and then you can always trade them if you go out on a landing and you're like, I need a size up or something. Other than that, you'll need to bring your own gear. There are opportunities for renting gear. We have a store that you can rent gear and have it sent to you. They used to allow you to do pickups in Ushuaia. We'll have to see if that's going to be the case. They kind of stopped doing that during COVID. So we'll have to see what that looks like. And also a lot of local outdoors shops are renting gear as well. So you might check if you're in a metropolitan area to see if places like REI, we have a place called Sports Basement, other gear shops that will rent some gear to you if you're not equipped for those sorts of things to go on the trip. Did I miss anything, Ted?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the tendency is to think that, oh my gosh, I'm going to Antarctica, I must need like, it's honestly, if you have decent gear to go skiing, you're probably very nearly fine. You basically want to be waterproof outside and have layers, and then the boots that we provide, right? So, ideally a waterproof, breathable top and pants, and all the hat and scarf and gloves, accoutrements like that. But it's really not like you need some expedition parka. I did see someone asked if we supply a gear list. Absolutely, and we're here to make it super approachable. The tendency for a first-time traveler to Antarctica is to gear up beyond what is necessary. It's pretty simple. I mean, I literally most days out, I'll have a thin long underwear top, another layer that's kind of like a tech long underwear layer, or a tech fleece layer, maybe a down puffy, like a down sweater, and then my shell and my Gore-Tex shell. And that's usually absolutely fine. And if you're in the Zodiac, it does get cold because there's air moving around. It can be windy, or just the movement of the Zodiac, and you're not moving very much. So for that, being dressed warmly is awesome, but it's not, the gear is not as big of a hurdle as it's easy to perceive it as. Yeah.
Ted, do you have any insights about the number of visitors visiting Antarctica this season, and when any of that info will be available?
Historically, it has been increasing. COVID changed that. So let's see. The total, I feel like in 2019, 2020, which the tail end of the season got cut off, but most of the season happened as expected. It was a bit over 50,000 total people, which is a big number, but this is an entire continent. That's less people than visit, than go to a major sporting event, right? So then 2020, 2021, there were 15 visitors, 15 tourist visitors. There were 2 vessels, 1 private yacht and 1 expedition yacht. And then this last season, I'm guessing it was about 20,000. It was a pretty attenuated, but still, there were a lot of vessels that went. But and most folks go to Antarctica by ship. There is a certain amount of fly-in. When you fly in, you're not seeing wildlife. You're going into the continent, like to climb a mountain or something like that. So most is ship-based, and I'm suspecting next year we'll be coming back close to its pre-COVID numbers. So there will be other ships around. We have a maximum of 1 ship at a site at a time. So if we could manage everything absolutely perfectly, you would never see another ship. That's not going to totally happen, but mostly when you see other ships, it'll be at a distance. So it is a big environment, and we are very small, and you just don't, that's one of my favorite things about that is the feeling that we're the only people in the entire space, the wilderness.
What are some of the expected temperatures for that time of the year?
It is, well, actually, this is one reason I love going a little bit after this kind of peak summer. With climate change in January, it is usually a little bit above freezing. So if there's precipitation, it's usually coming as rain. A little bit later, as it's getting a little cooler, it's usually at or just a little bit below freezing. So if it precipitates, it's usually snow, which feels a lot warmer. You're out on a snowy day and you're geared up, it's all fine. A rainy day and you're out, and that feels really, really cold. So it'll typically be right about 30 degrees. It can't get a whole lot colder because we're on the ocean, and it certainly can't get a whole lot warmer. Although sometimes if the wind, if it's not blowing and it's sunny, it'll feel, you can be out in a sort of a sweatshirt top. kind of thing.
I think that's all the questions. If anybody else have any extra questions, we can field them right now.
I just wanted to chime in, as Stephanie had reminded me to emphasize that, our leaders, since we're bringing our own leaders, this is their only trip to the Antarctic, or one of very few trips for the season. So really, they're fresh, they're ready to work really, really long days to get you out there and keep you out there as long as possible. Often to their detriment, everybody's crashing pretty hard at the end of the trip. So that's just another consideration, and obviously we're biased, but I've been on other trips where I've seen that be very different because of the seasonality of the guides being there through the whole season. They aren't as fresh if you're getting a group at the end of their, tenure on the ship for that season. And I'm not saying you wouldn't get a bad experience there, but you definitely get some people that are very, very motivated to give you that trip of a lifetime.
Gina, this might be you. What is the COVID protocol if someone gets sick, even if they're vaccinated? And then is there isolation protocols for how long? And then are N95s required everywhere?
I think I might jump in there because I've been keeping really close tabs on it.
Go for it.
What the case is for next February, I couldn't say yet. This season, we had to manage it really, really tightly. And I say we, in as much as I was a guest scientist. We, Cheesemans, didn't have a full, this size of a vessel that operated this year. But I was guest scientist aboard for another company at one point, which, oh my gosh, we spent less time in the field in the entire trip than we might spend out in a single day on our trip. So yes, biased, but with evidence. But yeah, so everyone is vaccinated to come aboard. We will surely maintain that requirement. And so where that excludes people, apologies, but such as it is. Tested en route, tested aboard, and tested before disembarkation. There was a pretty high rate of keeping COVID off of voyages. With a relatively smaller voyage, we're better suited for that. Isolation cabins is very limited in that environment, but basically the hope and expectation, of course, is that we don't get COVID aboard. What do we do if we do get COVID aboard? Isolation. What are we actually going to be doing as of next February, March? Will there be masks required? I couldn't say if that's going to be the case or not. I actually attended a post-Antarctic season. There's still a few ships down there now, but the season is pretty quickly wrapping up now. All voyages were requiring masks be worn in all public spaces. I am hoping that conditions are solid enough that that's no longer the case. There was, various ways of keeping groups together so that people were eating together, so that there was an element of social distancing and potential to do contact tracing aboard, so that if there was a positive case, you could isolate a group of people. If we have to do that, we will. And that'll be something that as kind of a community and industry wide, we have a lot of sharing of expertise. The remarkable thing for this Antarctic season was in the, I think, 20-something thousand people that were involved, there wasn't, as far as I'm aware, I could be mistaken, but as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a single severe illness. There was COVID aboard, but it was largely a management issue. And where there was health issues, it was the mental health of expedition staff who were pushed so hard to try to just manage all of these different elements on top of the intensity of the expedition. But yeah, something we take super seriously, and hopefully, we manage to just eliminate it at the dock and before that.
Will there be any research going on during the trip? And if so, will people be able to participate?
Yeah, so the photo ID element is, I didn't talk about that in great depth, but I could talk anyone's ear off at great length. My PhD is entirely No, not entirely. Is very much supported by, I was going to say entirely dependent on, but it's very much supported by citizen science, in quotes. And there will be, an active research element aboard. What that looks like, at times we've had like a boat that had biopsy sampling going on under permit. We're not going to have that here. This one element of this trip is it's in collaboration with a fellow named Mark Howardine, who wrote my favorite whale and dolphin guidebook in the world. This is the second edition. The first one was my favorite for many years until this came out, and it's just a fantastic. He's deeply knowledgeable. So in terms of participation with science, yes, absolutely. The photography of whales is a great asset. We may be doing some distant sampling, as in while we're operating, have active watch on the bridge, basically surveying whales and all marine mammals while operating. And then there will also be, is Allison aboard as expedition staff? That's bad. I should know this. She's we may have other citizen science aboard. I'm not 100% settled on that at this point, but yeah, I'm very keen on science and delighted for it to be participatory.
Will there be a polar plunge?
Oh heck yeah, sure. Intentionally, we won't push anyone overboard without intending to, but yeah, absolutely, that's something. I mean, yeah, the chance to jump in. I used to felt obliged to do this myself. Now I'm obliged to be there to, hold a towel to hand you when you're screaming and trying to get out of the water as quickly as possible. But yeah, it's good fun. Good fun to jump in icy water.
What's the ventilation system like on the ship? Are the cabins using centralized AC? Is there HEPA filtration on board?
That's as far as COVID protocol goes. It got substantially upgraded in order to, be able to better manage. So the ship operated this full season and did not have any. In fact, I think all but a couple of ships managed to get through without having any substantial outbreak aboard. And one of the biggest things that's credited to is the upgrading of HVAC systems such that you have fresh circulation. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions?
Seasickness Concern. Sorry, I just spotted that one in the list. If anyone is concerned with seasickness, it's really only an issue across the Drake and back, right? So you've got, the 2 days down, the 2 days back. As often as not, the Drake is super calm or very moderate. Like the ship is moving, but it's not bashing, right? It does happen. It can be. The Drake can be ferocious, but that's kind of 1 or 2 days in 10. I see Jay there, or Leora. I always get seasick on boats, including ferries, but I used a patch behind my ear and it worked wonderfully. Exactly. You come prepared, you prevent it before treating it, and the 2 days across the Drake are done. And once we're in Antarctica, it's very calm waters. Set your glass on the table and don't worry about it kind of calm waters. And then back across the Drake at the end. Hopefully by then you're sort of super accustomed to life at sea and can really enjoy the crossing, which can be super beautiful and can have, particularly the seabirds. My goodness, the albatross on the wing are really, my mom passed away back in November, and when I was down in Antarctica in late November, that was a happy place for her, and it really was a wonderful place to think about her standing out on the bridge and watching the albatross soar. It's a beautiful thing. So, yeah.
Okay, if nobody has any more questions, I'm going to post 3 different links in the chat. First is our YouTube channel. In the next 24 hours, the video copy of this Zoom will be posted on that for anybody that was either a latecomer, got bounced out because of internet issues, or couldn't make it today. We'll also be sharing that on our socials, as well as the itinerary link for the trip and a link to the book that Ted held up for everyone to see, so you guys can go buy that if you'd like to. Oh, we have one last question. Are you still available to use Russian crew vessels given the current conflict?
Oh my goodness. Operators with Russian crew may well be struggling. And there's actually a Russian oligarch-owned company that I have no idea if they're even operating. I'm very interested to find out what happened to them. But no, that's not an issue. Our crew is international, and combination officers, and most of the crew are Filipino, fantastic folks, wonderful folks. And officers are mixed, some Filipino, some pan-European, etc. So that is not an issue for us, thankfully. Gosh, I see some wonderful familiar faces there. Hi, Carol. And folks who've traveled with us to Antarctica many times. I think that there's more than a few here for whom Antarctica was, so just a word of warning, it's a once in a lifetime trip. I think my favorite line ever was someone who called us a month or two after, said, I could spend the rest of my life thinking how great that was, or I could spend the next 12 months looking forward to the next one, and signed up again. So I thought Antarctica would be once, and now I'm a polar biologist. So take care, but join us.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We appreciate you guys. If you guys have any questions, Gina posted her email and Stephanie's email in the chat. Be sure to hit them up and they can field them for you. The links for the itinerary, our YouTube channel, and link to that book is in the chat as well. We appreciate everybody coming today, and we hope to see you guys out there.
Woo.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you all.